Blog Talk Radio.
Right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, how are you? People of the world. Are you hospital porters sitting there at home by your radio sets and anyone else who might be listening? I hope you're ready for some Hpanwo radio this evening. I hope you can all hear me. I hope to get some confirmation on that pretty soon because, I'm a little bit paranoid about these sort of things after the technical problems we've been having. Can you all hear me? Hello? It's nice to see everyone there lined up. Am I loud and clear, gentlemen and ladies? Rob, we're ladies? Oh, Anon, thank you very much. Here we go then with Hpanwo Radio.
You're listening to Critical Mass Radio. Now, it's our turn.
And welcome to Programme 19 of Hpanwo Radio. Hpanwo stands for Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. Tune in for all the latest news, views and reviews from the world of government cover-ups, ghosts, UFOs, hospital porters, paranormal investigation, hidden knowledge, forbidden history and archaeology, chemtrails, and more hospital porters. I am Ben Emlyn-Jones, and this show is intended to be a companion to the Hpanwo blog and Hpanwo TV YouTube channel. Now that song was Out in the Cold, a live performance by Judas Priest, a great heavy rock band from the era of long hair and spandex trousers. That was actually from my daughter Louisa. I don't know if she likes the spandex trousers more than the music, but hope you like that, Lou. Right, well, tonight on Hpanwo Radio we have David Shayler, who is a former British intelligence officer who left MI5 and told the world what he was forbidden from telling. And he did it out of a sense of principle. Now, how often do you get that nowadays, eh? Anyway, after that, he experienced a spiritual awakening, and that gave him very, very powerful insights into the nature of the law and how it relates to God and love. And he's written a book called The Third and Final Testament, and this can be found on Scribd. Just Google the words, The Third and Final Testament. Also, we have NASA sealing off the moon, and that's quite interesting. And I should also, a lot's happened to me since the last show, because on Saturday I went to the David Icke Wembley Arena event, which is something that was planned well over a year ago, and I bought the tickets over a year ago, and I've been looking forward to it for ages. And basically, I'll give you a full report on that. And also, I should let you know that David Icke, is going to be providing a lot of the musical entertainment on today's Hpanwo Radio. That's right. Of course, his son Garrett is a musician, as most of you know. But now his father, it appears, is following in his son's footsteps. We're also going to have space weather, news, and everything else. And should be all kinds of interesting things coming up. Something for everybody's tastes. But first, there's something I have to say. I should mention that when I told people I was going to interview David Shayler, there were a few raised eyebrows, so to speak, and things like that. Now, what you'll find in the conspiratorial community is you get lots of people who will stick up for somebody who's been in the public eye, and they've said nonconformist things, and they've been received ridicule and condemnation. Now, by far the best and most obvious example of this is, of course, David Icke. But there are many, many people who have expressed very kind and supportive words towards David Icke. They've said things like, "Well done for sticking by your truth, David, in the face of such ridicule. It's very brave of you. Now, we know you're talking sense, David. We listen to you. It's other people just don't understand you. Any society where it's a crime to be different is a society based on psychological fascism. You're absolutely right, David," etc., etc., etc. But what's happened more recently is that a large proportion of those very same people have turned straight around from that, and they have said, "Have you heard David Shayler's gone nuts? Yeah, he thinks he's the son of God. He dresses up like a woman half the time. Phew, what a loony. He's lost his mind, I tell you. I used to respect him, but I don't anymore." Now, I ask the people who say things like that to look in the mirror and just listen to yourselves. Be aware of your own hypocrisy. One moment you offer friendship and admiration to David Icke and pour scorn on those who have lambasted him, and the next moment you yourselves pour scorn and lambast David Shayler. In other words, you're acting towards Shayler exactly in the same way that the, quote, sheeple, unquote, which you think you're so superior to, behave towards David Icke. Now that disappoints me very deeply. It wouldn't be so bad if any of you had actually listened to what Shayler had to say, but many of you haven't even done that. You've heard stories second or third hand and rumours, jokes on forums, etc., etc. Now you have to understand that all of our incitements to truth and freedom are hollow until we set each other free from the prison of what we ourselves think are sensible thoughts and sensible words. Now, lampooning somebody for being different is a conformist vice. Haven't we risen above that by now? I don't mean everyone, of course. I mean, a lot of you have been very, very much looking forward to this interview. And I know that, and many of you have been very glad I've got David Shayler on, but not everyone. There's a few sort of like, these are the people I'm really addressing, I think. Now, for those of you who do have the intelligence and the awareness to listen to David Shayler and hear what he has to say, you know, you're going to get the opportunity on this very program. Because, as I said, David Shayler is going to be interviewed this evening. Now, you may not understand everything he says, and you know, to be honest, I didn't grasp his every single point. But at least you have the sincere desire for information and to listen to the man with respect in order to find it. So, anybody who hears this show out, I take my hat off to you. I really do. Right, but before that, I have a few musical words from one of those two great nonconformists I was referring to. In this case, it's Mr. Icke again. I hope you enjoy this.
Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hpanwo Radio.
Wasn't that brilliant, eh? That was. I think now I make a joke by saying these are by David Icke. I think they're actually made, and the next song you're going to hear, made by David Noakes. So thanks, David, for those. Now that one is actually based on Paul Hardcastle's hit single 19, and it actually, if you listen carefully, you would have heard a brief vocal sample from our upcoming guest, that other great David Shayler, that is. Right now, let's see who's in the chat box tonight. I mean, we've got all the usual motley crew are there. Yeah, hi Lisa. And Paul and Rob, that's nice to see you all there. And we've got a very international listenership today. Plenty of listeners in the United States. We've got someone in Australia. I wonder if that's the Jungle Surfer. But and a lot of other people. And Rob Freeman is there. And yep, and it's nice to see you guys. Very nice indeed. Remember that you don't actually have to post in the chat box if you want to speak to me. You can write to me. I do have an email address, which is Hpanwo@criticalmassradio.co.uk. So send us an email, be nice. I mean, up till now, all I've really got is Alfred Webber's round robins, which is fine because they're very interesting and I like reading them. But you know, Alfred, write to me and say something else, eh? Of course, you can also contact me and discuss things with me and many other people on the Hpanwo forum. So if you go to hpanwoforum.freeforums.org, you'll find it there. And there's lots of very, very interesting people there, lots of interesting discussions. Any sort of Hpanwo-esque subjects we sort of discuss there.
Hpanwo Radio News.
Oh, as I was saying, I went to the Wembley Arena on Saturday and I saw a very, very brilliant live show by the one and only David Icke. And now, is there anyone listening who doesn't know who David Icke is? Well, basically, he was a BBC Sports correspondent, and I don't need to go into in great detail what happened to him after that, do I? Well, let me put it this way. In 1990, he arranged a public lecture at Devizes Town Hall in Wiltshire, in the English West Country, and 12 people turned up. David did his speech for a couple of hours. The people left. He put the chairs away himself at the end, and he was poorer afterwards than he was before. Now, his response to this disheartening outcome was to keep going. And on Saturday, the 27th of October, 2012, 22 years later, he hosted an all-day lecture at the Wembley Arena, which is one of Britain's largest and most prestigious venues. in front of over 5,000 people and many, many more on a live international internet stream. And I was one of those who had the privilege of attending. Now, it was a bit cold to begin with because we walked up to the Wembley Arena from the tube station, and it was bitterly cold. I mean, it's different to David's other events because they usually take place in spring or summer, but this was, well, it was, I don't know if you remember what it was like on Saturday, but it was very, very cold for the time of year, and my hands were numb, and I tried to do a Hpanwo TV video, but it wouldn't work because I had my mobile phone camera with me, and on my hands, I just couldn't operate it. But I was very, very glad because I was accompanied by Sue, who is my chipmunk and my twin flame, as Chris Geo of the Truth Frequency Radio calls his co-host Cherie, and she was with me the whole time, which was nice. She had an overcoat with a hood, and I realised I should have brought my glove and woolly hat. It was pretty posh around there. I mean, there's the Hilton Hotel just opposite, and I wondered if David was staying there, but he's probably more likely to have been in the Holiday Inn up the road because, contrary to popular belief, David is actually not rich, and that's a big subject, but he's not, I'll tell you. And then we saw Wembley Stadium, which is this huge sports ground, and with this huge arch like a rainbow towering over it, hundreds of feet ahead. And it struck me when I saw that when David was a footballer, he must have dreamed about playing there one day, and of course it was not to be because his career was brutally cut short by arthritis in 1972. But I wonder when that happened, did he ever suspect that 40 years later he'd be speaking at the arena next door about the issues he does today? I really do doubt it, and that just goes to show, as what happens in the future is always unexpected. And like I said, I tried to make a Hpanwo TV reportage, and it didn't work. I didn't have my Sony camcorder with me because I thought it would be confiscated at reception, so I just gave up after a while and did a written report, which you can get on. If you go to Hpanwo Voice, you'll see it there. Now, when we went in there and had our tickets checked, we were subjected to a body search. It wasn't that bad. We didn't have to drop our trousers or anything like drug smugglers might receive at customs, but we got a thorough pat down, and I was worried for a moment they might have those X-ray body scanners that some airports have, but they didn't. But my God, I mustn't give them ideas. I hope no one from Wembley Arena is listening to me. Now that would be very ironic at one of David's talks, I must say, if they did that. We got through that all right. They just basically run their hands up and down their body. There was a bloke who did it, unfortunately, and there was a nice looking lady, in the next queue, but I didn't get her, unfortunately. In fact, she was only doing the women guests. Now, Wembley Arena was actually originally built as an Olympic swimming pool in 1934, but it was converted into a concert hall and then a sports hall, and now it's used for many, many different things. And very, very grand. I mean, the foyer had like merchandise stalls, and there was people walking around with uniforms, with selling the books and the DVDs for David. And Sue bought a copy of the new book, Remember Who You Are, and I'm going to read that when she's finished with it. Now, the auditorium in the Wembley Arena, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's the biggest room I've ever been in. It's absolutely huge. And you look at people across on the other side, and it's only then you realise how massive it is. It's absolutely... I mean, I couldn't really believe that a space that huge could be enclosed. It's easily the biggest room I've ever been in. Now, Sue and I met up with one of our friends. Now, she's a lady who runs a child abuse action group. And she said to me, the day is going to come when David will pack out Wembley Stadium, let alone the Wembley Arena. And I do hope that will come. I do hope so. I found out actually that from somebody that a large proportion of the people who were there, it was their first ever David Icke live event, which is really, really good. We didn't have the best seats in the house, but that's not right. We could see David and we could hear him. That's the main thing. We got a bit annoyed by the people coming in late because our seats were right by the entrance stairs, and they kept walking past us, and it was really, really irritating. And but it was cold as well. We had to keep our jackets on because you can't really heat a room as big as that, the auditorium. But I bet however difficult it was, I'm sure David was finding it more difficult. But he carried on without complaining, as David did. As David does that, and So what excuse do we have? Now, that's what I always think. Now, I'm familiar with a lot of the information David says, and so I knew an awful lot of what he was presenting because I've heard it before and I've read his books, and I've actually been to now, it was before this one, I went to 7 of his live shows, dating back to 2002 when I went to see him in Stoke-on-Trent. But, you know, this talk actually was different from the previous ones David has done in the past. Because firstly, it was much longer. It was divided up into 4 segments with intervals instead of the usual 3. And all in all, David spoke, I think, for about 10 hours. And we were in that place for 12. It was 12 hours since we went in. And the second difference was it featured some live music. Now, all the segments of the songs began with Gareth Icke, who is David's son and a singer-songwriter. You know that because I've played many of his tunes on Hpanwo Radio, and I'd seen him live before actually because he played at a pub in Harrow in London, and he was also at the Alternative View 3 conference in Bristol. But on those occasions, he played solo with just an acoustic guitar. But this time, he was accompanied by a full rock quartet, you know, just like that Judas Priest song I just played. It was the same thing, and it was as loud and energetic as that. I think that's maybe one of the reasons I subconsciously chose that song. I don't know. But he began with the title song is "Remember Who You Are," and he played that. He played that twice, and he also played "What's Love Without Meaning," which is available as a single. And as regular listeners know, I played it because it was actually launched on program 6 of Hpanwo Radio. So if you listen to the podcast of that, it's the first ever broadcast of that song. It wasn't just Gareth who played. We had musical interludes where they also had like a troupe of dancers who sort of like had these pastel coloured clothes on, and they were just normal people who were just dancing, and they were dancing to sort of scintillating spiritual music, and it was very, very sort of like independent. They were all moving independently. They weren't in formation of any kind, you know. And Sue remarked, because Sue is a belly dancer, and she remarked to me how similar that style is to belly dance, because belly dance is always performed either by a solo dancer or by a troupe who are moving without formation in different clothes, you know. And this is, to me, is very symbolic of the nonconformist urge, because this need to metaphorically dance to the beat of your own drums. And it was really, really effective, and the audience began clapping, you know, we all clapped along. Now, in the first segment, David talked about the holographic nature of reality, which is something I've heard David discuss before. It's all about, Michael Talbot and stuff like that. You've probably all heard things like that before. But, I mean, he did include an awful lot of new stuff as well. He talked about Walt Thornhill and the Electric Universe. All the latest stuff, which a lot of it I hadn't heard before, which is good. At the beginning of the second segment, right, this is very interesting. David told us that a reporter had turned up from The Independent, and she turned up and wanted to do an article about the Wembley event. But the problem is she turned up 2 hours late. So she didn't even hear the opening segment where David talks about the nature of the universe and the cosmology which David is so interested in and studies so hard. Now, the thing is, you can't understand anything else David says after that unless you do understand his views on cosmology. And so David was openly angry about this, and he said so on stage. And I think that's understandable, because what happened was a few years ago is exactly the same thing happened. A reporter from The Guardian turned up, and again, he arrived late. He spent all his time outside on his mobile phone. He only popped in occasionally to hear what David had to say. And then he went away, and he wrote an article calling David a New Age Nazi. And he illustrated the article with a photo montage of David dressed up like Adolf Hitler, which is slanderous, I think. During the second and third segments, David spoke about the history of planet Earth and from the conspiratorial perspective, and this idea of the fall of man, which is something that he understands, and he was talking about it. He compared it with the film Avatar, which I've written about before, about how that's symbolic of this fall of man. The blue people, the blue creatures in Avatar, symbolize natural humanity, the pre-Illuminati humanity, and then something goes badly wrong. We have this this idyllic life, this idyllic world, which is symbolised by the Garden of Eden and Atlantis in myth, and by the Avatar movie in modern sort of fiction. But something goes badly wrong. Now, in the Avatar film, of course, it's all these humans from Earth landing, but neither, no one is suggesting, I'm not suggesting, and neither is David, that it literally involves a snake and somebody eating an apple or anything like that. But I think these stories are very important to study as allegories because of what actually took place. I think they symbolise, they're metaphors for what really took place. Now, David calls this the schism, where it all went wrong. What it is, you see, some kind of consciousness from outside our universe, malevolent consciousness, a parasite, a spiritual parasite, invaded this consciousness to steal its spiritual energy, rather like a vampire sucking blood. And David likens it to a scientist who's working in a glass sealed tank with those gloves that poke through holes in the walls. Now, the gloves, for him, a metaphor for the Illuminati bloodlines. And, spiritual people all over the world have seen these individuals that take, psychically sensitive people can see them take the form of reptilian humanoids. Now, that sounds crazy, but in the first part, David talks about decoding the nature of reality. And that's where it all fits together. And that's why David was annoyed with that reporter. And as it happens, that reporter did go on to write an absolutely atrocious article, which you can read if you go to theindependent.co.uk. Now, after that, David talked about the conspiracies, New World Order, stuff like that. But the ending was great because there was this uplifting music, and Gareth came on and played again, and David played a song called I Choose Love. And we had this kind of like dance, and he called it the non-comply dance, and we all kind of joined in, and we jumped into the aisles, and we started waving our hands and dancing. And it was one of those kind of tearful but smiley moments, It's so joyful, precious moments, and I loved it. And thank you to everyone who put that all together. Sean and all the other people who produced it, and Gareth for playing, and David, of course, himself. Thank you very much. Right. I'll be right back in a moment.
CMR Critical Mass Radio is a completely non-profit station where the hosts pay to broadcast their shows. The mission of the station is to get as much information as possible out to people about the world we live in, to unite like-minded people, and to try to come up with workable solutions. If you agree with the work that we are doing, then please feel free to help us continue by making a donation on the webpage. CMR is for people who want answers, because now it is our turn.
NASA has sealed off the moon. Well, at least a part of it. Now, I don't know if this makes you suspicious as I do, but bear with me. Because the age of private space travel is upon us. The age of private space travel is upon us. Now, at first, Russia got into space first, as you know. Then America followed. And then many years later, we had China and Japan and all the other countries. Now, there are loads of nations now with this ability to put rockets in space, put people in space. But it used to be just governments, but now it's private companies. They have money and resources to do it, to put rockets into space and even people. And what's more, to encourage this process, Google has launched a competition. It's called the Lunar XPrize. And what it is, if any privately funded project can launch a rocket to the moon, deploy a mobile lander, that is like a rover, drive it 500 meters, and then send a radio signal back to Earth, they then win. Now, one of the contestant teams has been founded by an American company. It's called Astrobotic Technology, and it has chosen its landing site being very near Tranquility Base, which is the supposed landing site of Apollo 11. And what it did was it planned to send its mobile lander into the vicinity of Tranquility Base and take photos and video footage of the lunar module descent stage and the flag and the footprints and things. Now, NASA's reaction to this was to approach the Google XPrize organizers and ask them to observe a set of exclusion zones around the landing site. At least 2 of the Apollo missions, and probably the others will follow. It basically means they don't want people going within, in one case, 75 meters, and another 225 meters of the places where those craft landed. And they say it's to preserve the locations in their pristine conditions, and because lots of people now want to make them national monuments. And they want to leave them basically untouched so that future historians and scientists can go there. Now, this also includes, though, a no-fly zone over the Apollo landing sites, because they say, vapor from rocket exhaust could even pollute the area. Now, we say, there's a major political statement being made here, because it's a very, very far-reaching thing to say that a national space agency or any other terrestrial authority can decide who has access to the location on the surface of a heavenly body. I mean, the landing sites of the Apollo mission, those Apollo missions were never intended to be beachheads for some kind of empire, and this might constitute a breach of the 1967 Treaty on the Use of Space. Now, maybe there's a sense in requesting that, that the Lunar XPrize people don't drive their rover right into the middle of the base and start digging up the footprints and ripping off pieces of the lunar module. Yeah, of course, that's fair enough. But, it's, because actually, the footprint that Neil Armstrong supposedly put on the moon will not fade, apparently, because there's no wind or rain on the moon. There are moonquakes and things like that, so it probably won't last forever. But some people say it will last forever. I don't know. But this brings us back to the question, can you create a national monument beyond the borders of a nation state, especially outside the Earth? And wouldn't it make sense for NASA to take advantage of the opportunity by negotiating and cooperating with the Lunar XPrize organisers to just send their rover to approach the Apollo landing site and study them from a distance, whereby nothing in them would be disturbed? Now, that would be interesting, from a historical and scientific perspective, and it would be a money spinner. It would be great for publicity. But perhaps NASA have got another motive for not wanting anyone to go near those landing sites, and that is because they're simply not there. This is a big subject about the moon landings, right? And but it's, have a look on the Hpanwo blog, because I've written a lot about this, and I think in program 5 I discussed Marcus Allen and his own issue with that. So strange, that, isn't it? Very, very strange indeed.
Hpanwo Radio News.
All right, it seems we have no space weather jingle this week. Sorry about that, but never mind. We shall proceed now to the space weather. So I'll go and you hear voices. I can't do it. It'll be back next week. Right, we have a comet in trouble. Now, I don't know if that's a joke or what, but no, it's just a way these people speak. Amateur astronomers are keeping a very close eye on this comet, which is called 168P Hergenrother. Now, what happened was, on October the 1st, it suddenly got very bright. It went from 15th to 8th magnitude, which is a scale astronomers use to describe how bright something appears in the sky. This was very, very close to the sun, actually. It was 1.4 astronomical units. Now, astronomical unit is the average distance of the Earth to the sun, so it's only just slightly further away than the Earth. Now, it's basically broken apart. That's what seems to be happening. It's no one can see it now, so we'll let you know what happens there. But it doesn't appear to be one of these near-Earth objects. So it's reached its the word is a perihelion, where it gets close to the sun. So keep your eye on that, and it will. I'll keep your eye on that. If I hear any more news, I will let you know. Right, we had a full moon last night. All together, 1, 2, 3. It rises at 4:47 a.m. and sets at 7:40 p.m. And now you tend to get this, actually. Sorry, it's the other way around, because the moon is kind of on the opposite side of the sun, and it sort of changes watch in the sky. And that's why when people notice the moon, it tends to be either gibbous or full. That's kind of how it works. Sunrise, 6:57 a.m. Sunset, 4:38 p.m. Now, the clocks went back on Sunday morning. I don't know if you noticed. Did any of you turn up an hour early for work? At the hospital lane, no one ever did at the hospital. We always remembered. But when the clock went forward, half the shift used to turn up late. Anyway, I was quite glad of that, actually, because after the David Icke show, I was very tired. So we got an extra hour in bed. So we're on Greenwich Mean Time now, which means it gets darker earlier in the afternoon now. So it's actually 20 to 5 in the evening now. In the afternoon, the sun sets. When we reach the winter solstice, it'll actually be 5 to 3 in London anyway. Earlier if you live further north. Now, Greenwich Mean Time matches Universal Time. So if you ever hear me talk about Universal Time on the space weather broadcasts, you'll know I'm talking about the time we're in now. On Sunday, the 31st of March next year, the clocks go forward back onto British summertime. Now, sunspots, we've got a few smallish clusters on the eastern side of the disk. Now, AR 1598, that caused all that trouble last week, is still there, but it seems to have calmed down a bit, and I'll go into that later in a minute. Spotless days, right? Guess what? We've had a spotless day. No, of course we haven't. We've still got no spotless days. Now, I'm actually going to launch a Hpanwo Radio competition. Any Hpanwo Radio listener who correctly predicts the day on which we don't get any sunspots will receive a signed copy of both of my novels, Evans Land and the first edition of Rockall. So write to me and tell me which date you think we're going to get a spotless day. If you guess correctly, you get those books. Signed copies. Worth a lot of money in a few years. Right, solar flares. Well, like I said, sunspot AR 1598 seems to have got off its chest whatever was bugging it last week, and it's gone dormant. Now, after all that activity, we had those big X-class solar flares. The sun dropped in activity very considerably and very swiftly, and it's gone remarkably quiet, actually. The baseline is it's very lazy and very stable. It's almost straight, like a mill pond, right at the bottom of the B scale. Now, that's a whole class below the level it was just 7 days ago. And it's, like I said, it's smooth as ice. Now, on Sunday, there was what has been described as a slow eruption, and that lasted for 9 hours, but it barely peaked into the lower sea range. But it formed a lovely picture, actually, an attractive arch of luminous plasma in the sun's corona. It did release a coronal mass ejection that shot way wide of the Earth, luckily, but apparently even these low-energy flares can sometimes do that. Now, in the early hours of this morning, there was a very brief and weak flare, and it never even touched the top of the B scale. So since then, smooth as ice, like I said. Geomagnetic storms. Mid-latitudes active 5%, minor chance of a minor storm 1%, chance of a severe storm 1%, almost nothing. High latitudes slightly bigger, of course, because in the high lats you always get more activity. It's a 50% chance of activity, 10% chance of a minor storm, 5% chance of a severe storm. So the geomagnetic storms have decreased considerably since last week. Near-Earth asteroids. Yesterday, 2012, UU169 passed 3 lunar distances away. Now that's quite close, but it's only 90 feet across, luckily. Now, on November the 4th, 2012 UX136 is going to come within 2.7 lunar distances. Now, that's a bit bigger. It's 120 feet across. But again, we often see these new asteroids discovered at the last minute, but they're almost always very, very small. They're just basically flying boulders. Now, if they impact the Earth, most of them would probably disintegrate before they reach the ground. These are not a danger. But it does depend on what they're made of, apparently. Now, stony meteorites, so that is ceramic ones, just made of rock, they're very crumbly and they tend to break up quite easily. But there is a minority that are made of metal, usually iron or nickel. Some are made of platinum even, and these are much tougher, and they're much more likely to survive an impact with the planet's surface. But the forecast is still, again, I don't want to give people nightmares because all the large meteors, that is half a mile plus in size, they're going to pass in double-figure distances. And the forecast is extended to the 29th of December. And anything big enough to be seen at that distance, they know where it's going to be anyway. Solar wind, speed 172.1 miles per second. Density is dead on 0.1 particles per cubic inch. So it's slightly down on last week, but it's still very, very dense indeed. No. That's my Space Weather jingle. I'll have it back next week, I promise you. I do love those anonymous things. I mean, I should apologise to anyone. Actually, I've told a few people I'm going to be at that event. I'm afraid I'm not. I can't make it. I'm very sorry. This is basically because I've got other things to do. But I mean, I've been asked to remind you actually that I am actually going to be one of the speakers at the Critical Mass Radio Conference, which I played the trailer just a little while ago. I'm going to be one of those speakers, and I'm going to be speaking on paranormal investigation, government cover-ups, UFOs, ghosts, and everything else that I think we need to know about, because I think these are the most important issues that are affecting our planet right now. And I've dedicated my life to dealing with these issues. And so I hope you can come to that. I'll be putting up some trailers on Hpanwo TV. So if you watch Hpanwo TV as well as listen to Hpanwo Radio, keep an eye out for them. And I will be letting you know. I mean, I'm working on what my speech is actually going to be, and I'll let you know as soon as I can. Right, we're going to have our guest in a moment, so stay where you're sitting and don't touch your dials, because David Shayler is coming up next. Now, he is a former British intelligence officer who left MI5, and he told the world what he had promised he wouldn't tell them, and what he was under security classification and clearance not to tell anyone. But he decided to break those rules out of a sense of principle. Now, that story has been very, very well told, and as I said earlier, he was very popular for a while, but then he became less popular, and I think unfairly so, when he started talking about other subjects, because, as I said, he experienced this spiritual awakening that's given him very powerful insights into the nature of the law and how it relates to God and to love. And he's written a book called The Third and Final Testament, and it can be found on Scribd. If you just Google Third and Final Testament, David Shayler, it will come up. But first, we're going to have a little bit more music from our Dave. David Shayler, welcome to Hpanwo Radio. How are you this evening?
Oh, very good. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, you're very welcome. It's nice to have you on. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the kind of work you're doing at the moment.
Well, I'm obviously probably best known for blowing the whistle 15 years ago on the intelligence services. I was an MI5 officer, and I was essentially blowing the whistle on MI6 funding associates of Osama bin Laden in Libya to try and replace Gaddafi, basically. And obviously that Gaddafi thing did come to pass relatively recently. But
yes,
I like to think that by blowing the whistle I managed to slow them down by about 15 years, because that plot was designed for 1996.
Well, you were proved right, weren't you?
Yeah, well, just to be clear, that plot did go ahead, and they got it wrong. They put a bomb or a grenade under the wrong car and killed a load of innocent people, basically. And I have seen things going wrong in the services before then, but nothing on the scale of murder. Now, even though I was an atheist at the time, I believed in the sanctity of human life. Therefore, I resigned from the service, and 10 months later, I blew the whistle, basically. For my troubles, I've obviously been to prison a couple of times. They tried to kill me on a number of occasions. And I've had to put up with all sorts of bullshit from people in political movements and so on, accusing me of still working for the intelligence services. But I would say to anybody, read any of the stuff I've written, it's quite clear that somebody who's working for the intelligence services wouldn't, for example, be trying to put pressure on the government to abolish MI5, for example, or would be promoting the law, which is your one way forward out of all of this mess, basically. I also got very heavily involved in Stop the War first, and then 9/11 Truth, basically. Yeah. And obviously, as an former intelligence officer, I could bring an expertise and experience in 9/11 Truth that other people couldn't bring. When they first approached me, my first reaction was, where are the air crash investigations? Because I'd worked on a Lockerbie issue, and I knew that every time a plane went down, it's a requirement of international law. For each separate plane, there's a separate inquiry in which they try and piece together the plane again. They find as many bits as they can. And I saw that plane in a hangar somewhere near Lockerbie, basically, as part of my MI5 experience. Obviously, large bits are missing, but nevertheless, you could still tell there was a plane there. Yeah. And as far as I can see, on the day of 9/11, even though 4 planes go down, there's no air crash investigation at all, no attempt to recover bits of the plane or forensicate or anything else. So, and a bit like the site itself, as we all know, Ground Zero was not forensicated for explosive traces.
Yeah.
So, I don't really understand these people who say they believe in the official story of 9/11 because, well, one, it doesn't mention Building 7, and two, there's no investigation goes on in that story. I mean, it's exactly the same thing for 7/7 as well, basically. Now, what they've done, as usual, is try and create as much confusion as possible, basically. That's their way forward, is to create division and confusion. And I've been a victim of that. I found the 9/11 truth movement at one point turning on me because I was trying to get at the truth. And at that point, I just decided I didn't want to be part of a movement that was so introspective and in some ways just so full of such small-minded, nasty people. Now, I'm not saying they all were. I'm saying there was a certain element who were very vocal. And in some cases, that's include my ex-girlfriend, Annie Mashon, as well, who was involved in that. So I walked away from 9/11 Truth in 2007, basically. I made a documentary called 9/11 and the British Broadcasting Conspiracy, in which we examined the conspiracy, the BBC Conspiracy Files programme about 9/11.
I remember that, yes. Excellent analysis.
Yeah, and it just showed all of the stuff that was, it was an introduction to 9/11. It was excellent, basically, because they were trying to say one thing, and we were just showing all the evidence that contradicted what had been said in the BBC programme, and how the methodology of the BBC programme was wrong. Anybody can create a conspiracy theory and then knock it down. I mean, this is a well-known technique used by the intelligence services known as a straw man technique, basically. So, you can look at all the conspiracies and say these are wrong, but at the end of that programme, it comes to the conclusion, therefore the official story is right. But no, you can't say that just because you've knocked down the conspiracy theories. And that shows me where we are at the moment in terms of wisdom on the planet.
Well, if you listen to Frankie's radio show last night, you'll find out the BBC are obviously still doing this.
Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. I mean, and this is what I mean, is that, we have a real lack of wisdom in our society. That anybody who truly understands wisdom, if somebody comes forward with a truth, like the 9/11 truth, like the 9/11 Commission, what you do is you examine why those people think that truth and whether they're justified in saying it. But the BBC Conspiracy Files programme hasn't done that, and nobody, as far as I can see in the mainstream, has at all, basically. And you think that's got to be a conspiracy stopping that coming out, because everywhere there are inquiring minds. I'm not saying that's the norm. I'm saying, there are vast swathes of humanity who are, quite frankly, as thick as pig shit, basically, and have absolutely no interest in inquiring into anything. But in any society, there is a number of people who will check things out for themselves, and so therefore those people will exist in the BBC, they'll exist in the Daily Telegraph, they'll exist in the Daily Mail. But therefore it takes a conspiracy to stop those people from getting their message out and investigating the truth, basically.
Yeah, that's it. We've all had experience of that, and I mean, you've had a lot of supporters over the years from our side, who have admired what you've done, me included, and we respect you a lot for doing that. And you have been proved right by events in Libya and elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I do point out is, in 1997, I was saying that the intelligence services were effectively funding associates of Bin Laden, therefore Al Qaeda. Now, when they came down me like a ton of bricks, and it really was, vitriolic, it even surprised me. When 9/11 happened, I kind of started to see why. Because if you've got somebody saying, well, the intelligence services fund Al Qaeda, and you've had this plan for years to launch this massive attack in America and blame Al Qaeda, if there'd been inquiry into my stuff and I'd been vindicated, it'd been very difficult for them to blame Al Qaeda in those circumstances. And secondly, what was particularly pertinent that I was blowing the whistle at the time was I had to prepare an assessment on Libya when I was in the services. And the first line of my assessment, the key points, was that MI5 does not have enough reliable intelligence to come to an informed assessment of the threat from Libya to the UK. Now, obviously, all the MI5 managers looked at this and nearly pulled their hair out. There was no way that was going out to government. They rewrote the report, taking that first line out. There was all sorts of excuses. And even at the end, I said, because I prepared it in March, about 1990. Was it 95, yeah? And I left the service in September 1996, so 18 months later. That report still hadn't gone out. And I actually went to my boss, and the last thing that I did, and said, look, has that report finally gone out? And he said, yes. I left the service, and one of my colleagues, I went out for a drink with after I'd left the service, told me they were lying to me, that the report still hadn't gone out, because it was still too embarrassing. Anybody who read it closely would understand that MI5 did not have reliable intelligence about Libya. Now, this is not some minor target. This was a Category 1 Joint Intelligence Committee target. This shows you how useless the intelligence services are actually doing their job. And that was one of the things that people missed about my whistleblowing. I was actually saying that on the one hand, these people are messing around with our civil liberties, doing all sorts of nasty things behind the scenes. But on the other hand, they can't actually do the job they're supposed to be doing, basically. Yeah. I saw so many failed operations that, that gave the advantage to the terrorists. I had to come to the conclusion after I left the service that this was strategic, and this was a part of the way to keep the budget up and keep the fear levels up, basically.
Yeah, it's rather like that film Wag the Dog. It reminds me of that.
That's a great example, actually. I mean, that's a brilliant film, because all the things they use in that film as examples of what they do to promote war have already been used in real life.
Incredibly prophetic film.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they were basically... I mean, the idea is that Libya has always been portrayed as this bad guy. But well, people say to me about Gaddafi, and the reply I say is, by the standards of European government, Gaddafi is a tyrant. By the standards of African government, he's a saint. A bit like Saddam Hussein. These were people who invested in their people, invested in education, invested in healthcare, and so on. They weren't like the Nigerians or the Saudis or any other really, really nasty governments, which are never picked on because, on the whole, they do what the West wants, basically. Yeah,
and I actually dispute now. I mean, when I was in the service, I bought into the idea that Gaddafi was a terrorist, basically, because he supported the IRA, he supported Abu Nidal and the Palestinians in the occupied territories and so on. But my view of the law now is that Gaddafi was not a terrorist, because the people who were supporting were genuine resistance movements. People like the Catholics in Northern Ireland had to take up arms to defend themselves after things like Bloody Sunday, in which 13 of their number were just gunned down in cold blood. Those people had no option but to take up arms and defend themselves.
Oh, there's a lot of story behind that. Yeah.
Similarly in Palestine as well. We've got the Israelis. There's no dispute in international law in this. The Israelis have occupied areas they shouldn't be occupying. They are therefore the invaders, and people are entitled under the common law and international law to use force to repel a violent invasion, basically. So in both cases, Gaddafi was not a terrorist. Now, the reason the Brits fell out with him was because in 1976 he nationalised the Libyan oil industry at the expense of BP, basically. Yeah. And as all with these things, you can always trace usually the oil industry or the finance industry somewhere have a hand in it. And similarly with his final downfall, just like Saddam, concocted a plan to sell oil, in his case in Libyan dinars. Saddam was going to do it in euros. And in both cases, that would have led to the overnight collapse of the American economy. The only reason the dollar has any worth is because it's a monopoly currency to buy oil. If people started buying oil in other currencies, which are much more stable than the dollar, as they inevitably would do, the American economy would collapse overnight because the dollar is worthless, basically.
Yeah,
so that's why they're suddenly motivated against these people. It's nothing to do with the goodness of the world. And I was actually watching the Libyan thing unfold. At the time, I was actually living in a house. I don't normally live in a house, but I was watching the mainstream media and not looking at the internet. And of course, it didn't make any sense. It's like, why have they suddenly gone for Gaddafi? We've had loads of articles recently about saying he's our friend, we've got trade links with him and everything else. And it was only when I got the internet and found out he was going to start selling his oil in this new Libyan-backed gold currency backed by gold, that you could see exactly what was going on. Again, the American economy was going to collapse, so they had to come in and get rid of Gaddafi.
Yeah, so it's always, as it always is the case, that the Western powers will back somebody who's useful for business, and their sort of conduct is neither here nor there. So obviously there's these people could be scumbags and no one cares as long as they're good for business, isn't it?
Yeah, so what I'm saying about all this stuff, particularly in my case, is people on the left, people in activist movements, and ahed about whether I was really doing what I was doing or whether I was working for MI5 still. If those people had listened to me in 1997 and backed me in trying to get an inquiry rather than going down that route, we could have stopped 9/11. And if we hadn't stopped 9/11, we could have stopped the invasion of Iraq. Because as I was saying, this Libyan document I prepared, they didn't have the intelligence to justify what they were saying about Libya. Now, it would have been very useful to have an inquiry into that at the time of the Iraq's weapons of mass destruction dossier, where they used exactly the same thing. They used, unreliable intelligence that turned out to be all untrue to try and justify the invasion. Again, if I'd had the support, we could have come forward with that and said, look, they've done this with Libya. Iraq's a very similar target, so let's be extremely sceptical about this Iraq's weapons of mass destruction dossier. Yeah. Also, at the time that came out as well, they distracted me. I mean, that was when they finally had my trial, basically. So I was actually, in my neck up to my neck, basically trying to defend myself, looking at the wrong end of 6 years in prison. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you looked at my trial, but I had an extremely unfair trial, basically. Mm-hmm. Wasn't allowed to cross-examine witnesses freely, wasn't allowed to speak in my defence freely, when the jury were interested in what I was saying. Because I said I resigned from the service because I witnessed a heinous crime, i.e. the funding of our terrorist enemies. The judge said the jury couldn't ask questions, and the jury have a fundamental constitutional right to ask questions if they need to ask those questions to get at the truth. And what I'm saying with all this stuff now, so I'm grateful for the people who did support me at the time, but those who pointed the finger at me should now, wear the badge of shame. They should be hanging their heads in shame, and they should be trying to make good that, and making good that by trying to support what I am doing now, basically. Yeah.
I remember very well. I remember there was a documentary on TV. The first time I ever heard your side of the story was this documentary on TV. I think it was called Schaller Secrets, where this guy follows you around with a camera to the island where you're living.
That was right. Yeah, that was in the run-up to the trial, basically.
Before that, all I heard about you was it was in the paper. You were in the papers and on TV, basically saying you had grasped and you had broken your oath of secrecy, and no one ever said exactly what it was you said or why you did it. And the Sun demonised you because you had broken your oath of secrecy. You'd given away information you shouldn't have, and they didn't actually say what information it was and what motivated you to do it. So I thought it was just so unfair.
Yeah, exactly. Let's be clear. I didn't actually. I never swore an oath to those people, and I think that's very important we bear that in mind, because the oath is actually germane to what I'm talking about at the moment. Yeah. I never swore an oath. I would never have sworn an oath, because that would involve swearing an oath to Elizabeth Windsor. And as somebody said to me when I was doing the Oxford Union, they said, "What about your oath to the Queen?" And I said, swear an oath, I've never even met her. And nobody got the joke. Why would I swear an oath to someone I don't know, for God's sake, And I wouldn't swear an oath anyway. I mean, I was an atheist at the time, but that's an important point, is there was no oath there. And even if there had been an oath, that wouldn't protect them from that, because this was murder. This was murdering other people. Now, and people have said to me what about your loyalty to your friends in the service and all this kind of thing. I'm sorry, all that goes to one side if you murder people. If you're a common terrorist, as we, the other way around, if I've been protecting the IRA, people would say, "Why are you doing that? These people are terrorists." But they try to pretend because these people were in MI6 and the MI6 were funding, obviously, a surrogate group to carry it out. That's the way they work. They use cutouts. But because these people are in MI6, I'm supposed to have some loyalty to them. But no, if you carry out murder and terrorism, you are a terrorist. You can't play the card, well, I'm in Britain, therefore I'm a good guy. That's not how the universe works, unfortunately. And I, to this day, stand by everything I said in that whistleblowing, basically. And I say again, if people had listened to me 15 years ago, I don't think the world would be in the mess it's in at the moment. Yep. And that's partly why I parted company with 9/11 Truth Movement 5 years ago. I wanted to see what they could do without me. And as far as I'm concerned, they're nowhere now. When I was doing 9/11 Truth, we were on Stephen Nolan's show, we were on Jeremy Vine, we were on Sky News. There's a very famous thing I asked people to look up on the internet when I got on Sky News to talk about something else, and switched the whole thing to 9/11 and got half an hour on prime time talking about the key issues in 9/11. And then these people still turned on me, basically, and they turned on me, and since then I've not seen virtually anything about 9/11 Truth in the news at all. The 10th anniversary, there was nothing in the mainstream media at all, because I was looking for it to see if anybody was trying to look at the alternative story. Absolutely nothing at all. In fact, the only thing we had was that Conspiracy Roadshow thing, which caused Charlie Veach to do an about turn on 9/11 and say, "Oh, it's all okay."
Oh, that was the same. Oh, it was basically the same format as the one Frankie was on. It was terrible.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I had a curious thing as well, because I just before that I'd been getting to know Charlie Veach, and he was, I was talking to him about using the law and stuff like that. He wanted me to represent him in court, and he'd done this interview for a thing called Vice Television, which is on an internet channel, basically. And in that interview, I actually said to him, nobody ever, I've not come across anybody who's gone back from saying 9/11 is an inside job to saying, the official story is right, or even the official story is broadly right, And he agreed with me. And in this program, we touched on a lot of issues that wouldn't normally be touched on in the mainstream, so I was getting quite a lot of progress with stuff. That interview was never shown after Charlie Veach went through his kind of Damascus conversion to the official story, basically. And I tried to contact Charlie on a number of occasions. I say at that point I knew him fairly well. I was supposed to be representing him in a court case using the law, and he refused to answer any of my calls, basically. And I was genuinely saying to him, look, if you've got some analysis or you've got some evidence that shows that the official story of 9/11 is right, please share it with me, because I really want to know it. And he wouldn't do that. And obviously, in the light of that, I have to have enormous suspicions about his motivations for that about turn, basically.
Yeah, well, Charlie, I mean, I was one of the voices appealing for calm when it came to Charlie. And I said, look, you can disagree with him. He's made a mistake, but just lay off with because he was targeted by a campaign of really hateful abuse.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. I mean, I think these things are orchestrated in some ways, but always at the time they rely upon the dark hearts of the small-minded human being, basically. And this is what I think our greatest problem is what I call munchkins, small-minded people who get on bandwagons without understanding things. Yeah. And that's what happened with 9/11 Truth. The first people who got into it, I would say, were all genuine truthers, people who really want to check things out for themselves, to share their information analysis, very calmly come to a conclusion about it. Once it started to take off on the internet and it became the new hot thing, the new fashionable thing, you got all these people who came in who didn't really understand it. They were just there because that was the new thing to do. And they were the ones who gradually took over and stopped 9/11 Truth from being effective. In fact, they stopped it being effective by just creating another hierarchical system, and that's one of the things I'm so utterly opposed to. I mean, I know from working in the intelligence services, if you want to disable an organisation, it's much easier if they've got a very strong central committee. Organisations, the classic example would be Al-Qaeda, which is, it's a very flat organisation of active service units. Not I'm saying we ought to use violence, I'm saying that we use their structure. Very difficult to penetrate, very difficult to stop, basically. But so organisations with a strong central committee, very easy to take over, very easy to derail, and that's what happened with all the left-wing organisations in the 1980s, basically.
Yeah, I was actually involved with 9/11 Truth for a while, and there was an awful lot of infighting. There was people who objected to my interest in UFOs, and they said, don't talk about UFOs at meetings, or don't mention Dr. Judy Wood and stuff like this. And I quit there was a forum there, which was good for a while, but it's gone downhill.
They stopped trying to get at truth. That was the point. I mean, at one point when I was, because I was actually with the Judy Wood stuff. I mean, I'm prepared to look at things, and obviously the key fact in the Judy Wood paper is the Hutchison effect, the weather effect that's observed in New York that day, which we know is observed when they fire lasers. Yeah. And there's no other reason for that happening that day in New York. So that is pretty much a prima facie piece of evidence for missile use, for laser use, basically. And so when I was coming up with this, people were saying, well, you can't say that. Think of what it will do to the movement. Well, think about the movement. And I was saying, then what about the truth, for God's sake? And again, I had the same problem. I was, at that point, sort of dipping my toe in the water spiritually. I've been an atheist for 40 years of my life, and coinciding my interest in 9/11 was taking a more spiritual path. And there were people there who claimed to be spiritual and said, we can't mention this. We can't mention spirituality. And it's like, well, hang on. If you believe in love, and this being the most powerful thing in the universe, why would you want to conduct your campaign putting that to one side? The universe has given you this extremely powerful thing called love, and it doesn't work like normal politics. That's the point of it, is if you do go out there and stand up for a genuine, difficult truth, you will know the love of the universe and all sorts of things will go right. If you start compromising your own truth, all you are, again, is a propagandist, basically. Yeah. You are not truly telling the truth. And I know from my own spiritual journey, that's when I took an enormous leap, was when it came to writing the book about the case, which is put out in my girlfriend's name, Annie Mershon, but I actually wrote it, basically. I had a decision about, because they were trying to kill me at the time, would I throw everything I knew at them, or would I try and compromise my truth in the hope that they would perhaps not try and kill me? And I did exactly the opposite. I said, right, I'm going to throw everything I know at them, because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do this, and we went to totalitarianism, basically. At least if I did throw everything I know at them, that way I've discharged my duty to the truth. And that, I believe, although I didn't become spiritual at that point, I think that's what led to me becoming spiritual shortly afterwards, basically. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they say fortune favours the bold, and, and it's always, the truth is always the best course, I always say. The truth is, honesty is the best policy. That's what I always believe.
CMR Critical Mass Radio in association with We Are Change Manchester and Freedom Northwest. If you want to spread ideas and information and attend meetings and activities, if you believe in freedom and liberty and want to be part of the change, this is the place to be.
Now, what I've found with many people, and I mean, you're one of many people I've known, is that any sort of anti-authoritarian or non-conformist journey, eventually you hit spirituality, and that seems to be the sort of the end result. Whichever direction you come from, eventually you hit the spiritual issues. That's that's something that you yourself have had a lot of experience with. Could you tell us a bit about that, about how that began and what happened?
Yeah, I spent 40 years of my life not just being an atheist, but perhaps the biggest atheist in the universe. I mean, I really was totally opposed to that stuff. I mean, I realise now what I've done was made the classic mistake of the atheist, is to judge God by the God created by man, essentially, and not the real God. And also to confuse religion with spirituality, basically.
Oh, you took the words right out of my mouth there, that's right.
Yeah. Well, you know, religion is a set of rules in the same way that socialism is, or capitalism, basically. So we can put all those in the same basket. What is different from that is love, basically. That's what takes you out from those things, and that's all the stuff about forgiveness, about about understanding your enemy, but not essentially, but loving your enemy, basically. And that was the bit I needed to go through. I did things out of tremendous love. The reason I carried on telling the truth for 10 years, or certainly for 8 years before I became spiritual, was because I had a great love of truth and a great love of doing the right thing. But at that point, I didn't believe in anything else, so therefore it was extremely egotistical not to believe there is some guiding force in the universe, and karmically that's not good. And my own story really was that I came out of prison the day before my 37th birthday, been in prison for the second time. And obviously I was, by this point, you know, they'd been trying to kill me, my health had suffered and everything else. But I had a moment in prison where, and to give you an idea where I was in the journey at this point, was a prisoner who couldn't read asked me to read the Bible to him. And I was such an atheist even then that I kind of was going to refuse point blank because I didn't want to fill his head with nonsense, basically. And I just thought, you know, you can't be like that in prison. The guy wants to read the bloody Bible. You take some solace from it, why not? And what I read was the Sermon on the Mount. And this, bearing in mind, is December 2002, yeah? This is when Bush and Blair, who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, are trying to promote an unlawful war in Iraq. Now, I looked at the Sermon on the Mount and thought, there's no get-out clauses here. There's no, it's all about love. It's all about standing up for truth and justice, the less fortunate, and so on. How can Bush and Blair claim to be followers of this man's teachings, basically? Yeah. And I have a moment now that I would describe as being filled with the spirit, or filled with the energy, or the Kundalini rising, or whatever, depending what culture you come from. And that at the time was extremely strange. I'd never felt anything like it before. I just felt very odd. I now know that feeling, which helps me much more frequently, when you know that you're filled with divine light, and it has a purity about it that is greater than any other feeling you will have, basically. Yeah. So that was the kind of start of it. I then read about the Bible code, based on, you know, I know about the Bible code and the Torah and so on, that appears to predict future events, and this attacked my rationalist view of the universe. Now, many people say that the Bible code has been discredited. It hasn't. They did one BBC Two programme on it, which they did some extremely unscientific research into it. And that is what many people now come back to you and say, the Bible code, no, it's a load of rubbish.
No, it's BBC Horizon. Well, you can't, I mean, don't get me started on that programme.
Yeah, it was a BBC knocking programme, basically.
Yeah, it is on many subjects.
Yeah, and if you actually read what I did, because I say it was such an attack on my view of the kind of utopian universe that I had at the time as an atheist, I tried to disprove it. But I was a true rationalist. I couldn't let that just be out there and carry on being an atheistic rationalist when there was something that obviously didn't square with that. I saw it as my duty to try and disprove it. But the more I read, written by statisticians and people who know about these things, this is all academically peer-reviewed stuff, I realised that there was something in the Bible code, basically. And that was what I would call piercing the first veil, where suddenly you realise that there's more than these 4 dimensions here. There's something else out there, and you've got to find out what it is. And that led to a whole lot of research into the esoteric, basically. I also looked into all the stuff, the crucifixion, Freemasonry, Knights Templars, I also looked at the alien stuff, all that kind of stuff that all comes in a bit of a bundle, really. And as a result of that, I learned about Kabbalah. And strangely enough, at the time I didn't have much money, I was getting books out of the library. And there was never any books about Kabbalah in there. I kept thinking I must order one, kept forgetting. And then I read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. Next time I went to the library, there was a book on Kabbalah. And when I read it, I realised that the Kabbalah creation ideas were exactly the same, or the core principles were exactly the same as quantum mechanics, basically.
Yes, that's right.
The flash of Zion is the Big Bang, from which all energy comes, the single thing from which all energy comes. In Kabbalah, that's obviously the energy of God, but nevertheless, it's still the equivalent concept. The Tree of Life has 10 dimensions attached, one not attached. That's the same as Hawking suggesting universe of 10, 11 dimensions. And Kabbalah says that we live in a realm of 1% light and 99% darkness. And Hawking says that 1 to 5% of the universe is observable. The other 95% is dark matter. So you've got some really core concepts that are exactly the same. Yeah. And that was the first time in my life I suddenly thought, that question I've asked all these religious people, like, where is heaven actually? And they've never been able to answer it. Suddenly, it was answered for me. There was a possibility, at least. There was a place that could be beyond these 4 dimensions that quantum mechanics would allow to be, in theoretically inverted commas, heaven, basically.
Well, a lot of physicists are actually been inspired by the Kabbalah. Like, I think Albert Einstein read it, and Robert Oppenheimer, I know, read it. And
all those people. It's quite a peculiar one. People misunderstand what Kabbalah is. People call it Jewish spirituality, but it's actually the other way around. Kabbalah is the source of all religious and spiritual knowledge on the planet. In fact, over the millennia, the Kabbalists have tracked how the gods have shifted in names in different cultures. There's a book, I can't remember what the book is now, I can't remember what the actual book's called, but it's one of the Kabbalah books in the back. It's got a thing called Tables of Correspondences. So you look at the pantheon where you say, oh, this is Jesus or whatever. And you just go across and have the Japanese version, the kind of Indian version, the Eskimo version, the Greek version, the Roman version. So it just shows that actually there aren't loads of gods out there. There's only a few. It's just man has chosen to call them by different names over the millennia. But nevertheless, they're worshipping the same God. They're worshipping the God of love or whatever. So it's not quite as people make it out to be, basically.
No, I mean, I've had a quick look through. I couldn't read all of your book, but I've had a look at some of the passages, and I remember you were saying that all the different cultures around the world have developed the same idea in terms of spiritual ideas.
But yeah, I mean, also the idea of a chosen one is not just linked to Judaism or Christianity or Islam. It's shared by the Eskimos and the Hopi Indians and so on. All sorts of. I mean, even the Druids. People will talk now because they put out propaganda. You meet these people who claim to be Druids in Glastonbury and they'll tell you there's no Messiah and all this kind of thing. But when the early Christians first came over from Palestine to Britain, it wasn't like the Druids said to them, there's no Messiah, you've got this wrong. It was just they said to them, no, actually he hasn't come yet. We've been watching the stars, the astrology above, the movement of the stars, and it's not right yet. He hasn't come yet. You're too early, basically. Yeah. But it wasn't like they didn't have a concept of a Messiah.
Because they made contact with the British people before the Roman conquest, actually. They actually came here before the Roman conquest, which was where we lived in a completely different world to what happened after that conquest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And again, I mean, if you look at all the ancient myths and all these kind of things, they use different symbols to talk about the Messiah. And this has led to some peculiar searches for, the Holy Grail, the magic cauldron, and so on. These are all actually metaphors for the actual Messiah, basically. On one fundamental level, obviously the vessel that contains the Holy Spirit is the Messiah, basically. But in terms of my journey, though, I mean, I had a very conventional spiritual awakening. So this is around about 2000.
Is there such a thing?
Well, it's there. Well, I mean, I went through something that wouldn't distress people. I mean, obviously, I started to meditate and so on. I started to see other things, how things fitted together in the universe. I then got involved in 9/11 Truth, and I found that I could see the truth in that in a way other people couldn't. And I started to get a massive education on other stuff that was going on in the world through meeting 9/11 Truthers and everything else. And for about 2.5 years, I had what we call a fairly conventional spiritual awakening. And then in July 2007, I had a massive leap in that awakening, basically.
Yeah, I saw in your book you were talking about. I'm sorry, but I was just in your book you talk about you went to this chapel, or you went to this place.
Chapel. That wasn't to do with that was the end of the awakening, basically.
All right, I'm sorry. You tell a story.
Yeah, I mean, what happened in the course of about 2.5 years was some very strange things that happened to me. Like, for example, me and my ex-girlfriend Annie, we'd taken in her brother, who we were told was an alcoholic, had mental problems and so on. And at one point in 2005, he said to me, he was the Archangel Gabriel. Now, at the time, I thought the Archangel Gabriel was a type of consciousness in the heavens rather than, something that incarnated down here. So I dismissed it. And he then said to me, do you know who Yeshua is? And I said to him, it's a Jewish name for Jesus, because I'd just done this research into esoteric stuff. And he said, no, it's not. And I said, yes, it is. I know this stuff. You haven't done the research. And he said, no, it's not. He said, you are Yeshua. I've got to tell you, you are Yeshua. Now, he was absolutely right, because, Jesus is actually the name of the God above. And Jesus Christ is a mistranslation of Yeshua Messiah, the Hebrew term, basically. It should be Yeshua Christ, or if you have to transliterate those Hebrew letters in a different way, but a different accepted way into English, you actually get Shayler the Christ, which is my name. Obviously, I knew none of this at the time. I then went to an ayahuasca session, had a bloody awful time with it, but at the end of it, this girl came up to me and my mate and said, I went to see a clairvoyant last week, and she said I'd meet the one at my next ayahuasca session. And we just thought, the one would be somebody you went out with or whatever. So we've been talking about this, and my friend had vague dalliance with her, fallen apart. And another friend had said, yeah, but the one could have been you, Dave. Meaning you could have gone out with her. And I said, yeah, it's funny you should mention that, though, but the one in most cultures is not somebody you go out for the rest of your life. The one is the chosen one of God. And he said, what are you saying? I said, I'm not saying anything. I just find it a funny kind of thing. It was just a joke that somebody had come up and said this.
Yeah.
So there were funny little signs like that, and I was getting much more information from the heavens, on a mushroom trip, and people will tell you that, it's a mushroom trip, therefore you're delusional, you're seeing things and so on. What do you think the Old Testament prophets were taking? They were taking magic mushrooms, for God's sake.
Yeah, I mean,
those visions.
Oh, I know. I'm very, very keen on on the sort of like stories about ayahuasca and psychedelics, and I'm a big fan of Terence McKenna. And you know, I'm actually I'm going to interview an Orthodox rabbi actually, hopefully soon. And he's obviously he's an Orthodox Jew in most ways, but he's also very into this kind of thing. And he's very, very aware of this kind of one. So, David, so what happened after that?
I was going on this mushroom experience, basically. But by this time, obviously, as a result of becoming spiritual, I'd started to do a bit of ritual around my mushrooms. And I had a thing called the 72 Names of God, which something comes from Kabbalah. I used to open it up before a mushroom session and meditate over the name of God I got. And the one I got on this particular occasion was one that transliterates as Jezel, and it's all about bringing heaven to earth and activating the Messiah within. So, and I'm actually on Dartmoor at this point, and Dart in Kabbalah is knowledge, basically. So there's got signs around all this, and we went to this very ancient stone bridge over a river. And when we arrived there, I was there with two friends. The heavens opened. I got my second verbal communication from the divine. I'd had other impressions and signs and so on, but I'd only previously had one thing where I could clearly hear a voice. This was only the second time that happened. And the voice was very clearly said to me, "You are Jesus standing next to Joseph of Arimathea and John the Baptist." Now, my first response wasn't, "I'm Jesus." My first response was, well, we're tapping into some kind of Jungian archetypes here because of the work we're doing with the truth movement and so on. And later on in that mushroom trip, I went through an experience where I was told that I was crucified 2,000 years ago. And was anybody asking those circumstances, I asked, was I Jesus? And God actually answered me in the most honest way and said, "No, you weren't Jesus." And I said, that was, strictly speaking, a correct answer, because Jesus is the God up there and Yeshua is the man down here, basically. And then there was a whole lot of stuff that happened after that. I was getting messages about being crucified with a crown of thorns and nails, all sorts of stuff. But in 1 BC, and I checked that out and realised that there had been a mass execution of Hebrew revolutionaries, 2,000 of them in 1 BC, basically. And obviously I didn't find this from official records, but when you look at the discussions around it by people like Josephus, the Jewish historian, and so on, there were 3 figures who were identified as possible leaders of this rebellion. And when I read about one of them, I felt the pain of crucifixion again. Not for long, only for a few seconds, but I felt that breathlessness and pain. And I identified, therefore, the man at the time was a strong Jesus. At this point, I did believe in reincarnation, so I thought I'm a reincarnation of this man. But obviously, I was told by God he's not Jesus, so I wasn't Jesus Christ from 2,000 years ago. And this all began to hot up. I was getting more and more and more stuff. And it was getting to be a problem. I was actually trying to put it to one side, thinking my ego was playing tricks on me. I've been told I'm the prophet, the chosen one of God, all this sort of thing. And I just thought, this is all a bit mad, really. I mean, it's my ego playing tricks on a spiritual journey. Because I stressed that I had no spiritual teacher. I just, my way forward was to see what was brought to me, because that's what it was like. I mean, sometimes I'll be in second-hand bookshops and I just get a little ringing and I look at a book and then read it, and that'll be exactly the book I have to read at that moment, basically.
Yeah, that's what happens when you trust your intuition, and... Yeah,
well, anybody who's been in the journey will know this, is that you start to get this thing where things come to you that you could never find in a million years. I mean, I just another example of this, actually, was about the 7/7 case, where I was, at the time, and I still hold there is some information about this, that the 7/7 bombers had not died on 7/7. And obviously, you're not going to find anything else about that on the internet or whatever, but I went to consult a solicitor about my own case, and at the end of the meeting, he just took me to one side and he said, "Look," he said, "I don't know what to make of this," he said, "but I'm defending the 21/7 guys, and they're telling me they saw one of the 7/7 bombers alive after 7/7. What do you make of that?" And I said, "Well, that's amazing, because I've been looking at this as a theory, and that's really the first," obviously this was hearsay evidence, I didn't interview the guy himself, but I'm kind of fairly trusting the solicitor bringing this up to me. That was a kind of nod in the right direction, basically. In terms of the spiritual journey, I realised, I mean, my friend used to do about the Da Vinci Code, which he says is full of black magic symbols and all this kind of thing. And when he was doing it, I was watching it, because by this time I realised, I put kind of East and West together and realised that the idea that God incarnated once 2,000 years ago was wrong, and that actually what we had was this reincarnating soul that would come and teach humanity certain things at certain points. So I put that together, and I didn't think anybody else knew about that, because I'd read the esoteric, and it wasn't obvious from that. I looked on the internet, I couldn't really find anything about it there. I had seen one little thing about it in my life, but that was it. And that was only in a book that hadn't really got much promotion, basically.
Is this the life you're living now, your incarnation you're living at the moment? Is this consciousness?
Yeah, what I have come to understand is that I am the last incarnation of that soul. The reason I'm the last incarnation is because we stopped reincarnating fairly shortly. The widely predicted date of human change, the end times and so on, we've kind of lived through that, and the end of this year, 2012, things are going to change for the better, essentially. There will be a shift in human consciousness. That doesn't mean that everybody suddenly becomes a saint. It doesn't work like that, obviously. One thing I think from this journey is you've got to learn lessons the hard way. And by learning lessons the hard way, you learn them that much better, basically.
Yeah, it's only a couple of months away now, isn't it?
It is only
less than 2 months.
What I do see at the end of this year is a whole lot of people just suddenly going through this moment of realization, of suddenly thinking, what the hell am I doing in this system? Why have I believed these lies? Why am I working in the city exploiting people?
Yeah.
Why am I working in the oil industry poisoning the planet? That kind of stuff. And
that's good, yeah. And I actually feel that we're going through that. That's actually happening at the moment. There's a whole lot of all the revelations that are coming out at the moment about Jimmy Savile and the Hillsborough disaster. I mean, it's all seems to be coming out at the same time, and I take hope from that.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely right. I think that that's all part of the process. And obviously people have already seen this. I mean, I've been going to festivals since 2005, and I've noticed over the years more, almost reaching an exponential level of people suddenly realising true spirituality rather than what I'm called New Age bollocks, that kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, really.
Yeah. There's a Slaxer on YouTube. He calls it malignant spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, I call it communist spirituality. It's kind of peculiarly godless spirituality that just is another excuse for egotism. And you often find these people who talk about New Age spirituality will tell you they are God. What do they mean by that? I mean, I don't call myself God. I think I'm Jesus Christ. So I mean, what these people think they've done to earn the title of God, I do not know. They're often the most small-minded people you could possibly imagine.
Right.
So I just don't believe that you are God stuff at all. You're potentially a God, which is slightly different, and I believe that's what we're on the journey to. Now, obviously, people have problems with the fact of me saying I'm Jesus Christ, but I say I'm here to teach people the way to Christ consciousness. Part of my job is to come here and activate the Christ consciousness through my challenges, through the challenges I've faced, and through my actions. Having done that, there is now a Christ consciousness that exists here that other people can ascend into, and it's my job to essentially show them the way to that. I can't save them. It's a matter of their own free will. They have to make a decision to go on that journey and try and become a Christ and learn the lessons the hard way as well. But I'm here just to be able to tell people that is happening, and if they want my help in being pointed in the right direction, I am here to give it. But, I'm not here to wave a magic wand and save humanity. I am here to give humanity the possibility of salvation, basically.
Yeah. Right, and we've only got a few minutes left, but I'd love to talk some more about this, and hopefully we can maybe get you back on the show sometime, another time. But tell us about this book, The Third and Final Testament, which is available free on Scribd, isn't it?
Scribd.com, yeah. If you put in Third and Final Testament or David Show, you'll get it. What this comes to, I mean, obviously, I think there's a number of things that make me a unique Christ claimant. One is I don't claim to be a reincarnation of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ didn't come 2,000 years ago. The reason we know that is because Jesus Christ ushers in the new age, the age of peace and love. And that clearly hasn't happened in the last 2,000 years, so clearly no Christ claim there. Secondly, I have documents that I can point to that for long before my existence, for at least 2,000 years in some cases, based upon the Bible, so that these documents have been well kept. They're not something that's been invented recently as some psyop or something like that. But my name is in. These documents are all associated with the name of God or the name of the Messiah. So uniquely, I can also put my hand on documents and say, you can find the letters in Hebrew, generally speaking, but the letters are equivalent to David M. Shayler or David Michael Shayler in there, basically. That's a very unique aspect. And thirdly, I've actually come to understand the law, basically. And we all know that in the Bible, Jesus Christ talks about the law, but this has become confused with the Jewish version of the law, which they call the Torah, which strictly speaking isn't the Torah, it's the Torah, it's plural. And actually it doesn't mean law, it means instructions, yeah?
Right.
Now, there's a difference between law and instructions and rules and regulations and legislation. Law says, love your neighbour as you love yourself. In practice, this means, therefore, you have a duty of care to your fellow man, basically. You don't deliberately go around and infringe their rights. You don't try and kill them or steal off them. But you also are careful enough in your actions to ensure that people don't come to harm indirectly. And I say the example of this is if you had to dig a hole in a darkened alley, what you do is you'd light it up and put a barrier around it, because you're walking down a darkened alley and someone dug a hole, you want them to do that for you, basically, so you didn't fall in and break your leg, basically. And that is really the simple test of it. You have a duty of care to ensure that your actions do not lead to the infringing of the rights of other human beings. Corporations don't come into this because they've got no souls. So to have determination of the law, you must have a soul or a conscience, because then you can make a decision according to conscience, whereas a corporation has no soul, no conscience. All a corporation does is behave like a psychopath.
Yes.
And that applies to both financial corporations, which work in the interests of their shareholders, but also to trade unions and so on. They work in the interests of their members. It's exactly the same kind of psychopathic behaviour. And let's not forget, the trade unions backed Blair, the war criminal, when he was in office, basically. They had nothing to do with that. They could have withdrawn their funding and made the man look like an idiot and taken him down, but they didn't. They chose to back a war criminal. And that's a good example about how even these so-called social corporations are just as evil in some ways as the financial corporations.
Yeah, I've been involved with trade unions, and well, it's a long story, but yes, I agree. Yeah.
And I have the same problem with them. And I say, so therefore, the problem is the mob, basically. But the mob has no, or the corporate conscience has no determination under the common law. And what I've uniquely done with my research, there's lots of people out there talking about things like free man and stuff like that. But what I've actually done is looked at where that principle of love your neighbour as you love yourself is recognised in their systems of legislation and constitution, basically. Like, for example, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Amongst these, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is the preservation of the common law, basically. It then further preserves that law in the Constitution. Article 9 says that all rights which are not mentioned in that Constitution remain with the people. Therefore, the common law rights remain with the people. So people don't live under the Constitution, live under the common law, have a way out through the Constitution. Similarly with Magna Carta. Magna Carta did not invent human rights, despite what the American Bar Association tries to tell you, because they're the ones that put the plaque at Magna Carta, and also other people will tell you, it didn't. What it did was first time wrote down those common law rights, but nevertheless, having done that, the parts of Magna Carta that haven't been repealed preserve the common law. They preserve that principle. It's also preserved in the oath. We think, we've been taught that constitutionally the Queen has no power, it's all about Parliament. So why are all the ministers and MPs swearing an oath to her? She's got the power still, that's the point. And that's where Jesus Christ comes in, that essentially the Queen is supposed to be keeping the seat warm, or the monarch, whoever it is, until Christ arrives. So the Bible, people have many, many problems with the Bible, but the Bible only commands you to do one thing, and that's love. And any instruction comes below a command, basically. So it might say go stone adulterers, but that's all part of the test, basically. You're supposed to think, well, hang on, if I'm stoning adulterers, what does that say about how I love my fellow man? This is a simple spiritual test, but obviously one that people in religions fail because, again, they're part of that mob consciousness, basically. Yeah,
they take things literally, and they don't sort of really understand it. Well, David, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, because we've run out of time. But, we have to get you back on again because I can see you. There's an awful lot more to talk about here. So would you be able to come back maybe in a few weeks?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying that I've kind of been very quiet for about 5 years now.
Right.
I've stepped back and tried to let humanity get on with it, and as far as I can see, because people said to me there's no need for a Christ, so I thought, well, okay, well, you can get on with it yourselves. I haven't seen it improving. I really haven't. So to me, there is a need for a Christ to come here and tell people about the law. People have got to be clear about what that role is. It's not a conventional hierarchical role. It's first among equals. And obviously, I've been tested over those years, and I don't think I'm the kind of person that anybody actually studies what I did and what I've said and what I've done. Has never abused my power, basically. When people have asked me to stand in organisations and so on, I've said, no, I'm not going to stand for office. I'm not going to lead in that way, basically. I will lead as an inspirational figure. I will lead by example, but I am not going to take any formal position of leadership.
Well, that's very wise,
is to free people through telling them about the law, basically. And I have a form of words and a letter I've used to get people off credit card debts, council tax, television licenses, parking fines, and so on.
Right,
100% success rate of that letter, as far as I'm aware. And what I want to find now is people who will do that with the mortgage, basically.
Well, the book is http www.scribd scribd.com, and if you put in, you've got to just Google Third and Final Testament David Shayler, and they'll get it. Isn't that right?
Just Google it on there. So I've not done nothing to promote this so far. I've just put the research out there.
Right. Well, all listeners can get this book here. It's for free. And David, do you have any other websites, or is it just that one particular one you want to talk?
I've got some bits I've done on YouTube. I think called Schaller TV. If you put that into YouTube.
Schaller TV, yeah.
And a one called Christ TV as well with some stuff on it.
Okay.
But I've never got all my stuff together. You just basically put my name in there and do your own research, basically.
Right. Well, David, we'll have to have you back on again to talk more about this. And thank you very, very much for being on Hpanwo Radio. It's been good to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Okay. Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye.
That is the end of Programme 19. Thanks for David Shayler for that great interview. And thanks Everybody at CMR for listening to, including people in Southampton, in St Albans, Hertfordshire. I think I know who that is. Runcorn, Cheshire, Sheffield, and a place with a lovely name, Port Sunlight in Wirral. We've had a Swiss listener in again, and someone from Kingston, Pennsylvania, Chico, California in the USA. We've also had someone from Ipswich, Queensland today. That's good. I wonder if that's Jungle Surfer. Now, Beatrice, what's she up to? Paul Rippon is up next with the Unpenned Show. Now, while I was on the air, when I was doing the interview, which was recorded, we had a caller who called into the studio. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to take your call. I'm afraid I'm going to have to arrange that in advance when I want to have call-ins. Okay, so if that person is listening, I apologise for not taking your call. Right, we're just going to play out with a bit of Kate Bush. This song came out, actually, when my ardour for Kate had dampened a bit, because she was my first love, who I fell for when I was 3 years old, but it rekindled later, of course. Now, Kate Bush was a member of a UFO group, and she's into Wilhelm Reich, of course, and I've already played Cloud Busting. This is another of her great singles, and I hope you like it. Now, we're having a great evening on Critical Mass Radio. I do hope you'll carry on listening. That's all from me. Good night, and God bless.